Beyond the Ring, a podcast that covers all things in the stock show industry from the informative to the insane, starring Ryan Rash.
An eclipse is one of the few phenomenons that is actually more impressive from the ground. At least that's what they think.
And Dale Hummel.
I fear the day that technology will surpass our human interaction. The world will have a generation of idiots.
Now on with the show.
Welcome to Beyond the Ring. This is Dale Hummel, along with co-star Ryan Rash.
Hello, hello, hello.
Ryan, is it dark, daylight? Where are you?
It's not dark. The eclipse was yesterday, Dale.
Oh, gosh, I thought maybe you were still in the middle of it.
No, it's over.
Now, you know,
It's
some
only
people were trying to drive to stay in it, and there are others that have planes trying to stay in the darkness, following the path of totality. You should have got a ticket. I was in the path of totality for an hour or so prior to it getting there, and by the time it was there, I was out of the path and didn't notice much personally.
We weren't in the totality, and we had the glasses, and we saw the things, but it wasn't anything. It was not a moving experience for me.
You were unimpressed.
I was unimpressed. Yes.
I think there's a large part of the population that was a big deal.
Oh, huge. Yeah. Like people came from foreign countries, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. Like there's a whole eclipse junkie sort of people that I never knew existed till this. And so, yeah.
I would get far more excited if they were saying it was alien induced or something like that. But I appreciate the ability of mathematicians to calculate when these things are going to happen so many years in advance. I appreciate that.
There you go.
What about, and I shouldn't even ask you this, are you aware there was a college championship basketball game last night?
There was two, actually, the women's and the men's. Men's was last night, and the women's was like Saturday, I guess. I don't know, but yeah, watched all that.
You did watch it?
Well, I watched part of the women's because the group that I was with, they decided that they were suddenly from Iowa, even though Callie's mom, I don't think ever has been to the state of Iowa, but she was a honorary Cornhusker because of Caitlin Clark. So
she brought a lot of fans in. You cannot deny that, and she's impressive to watch. I am not a huge basketball fan. I enjoy watching my daughter play, and I enjoyed it when I was in college. And I would say I watched very little of it outside of high school basketball at this point. But it is fun to watch her play. And I found some entertainment value watching the men's game championship last night, at least for the first few minutes, and then Purdue kind of lost track of what was going on, and it wasn't as much of a game. But wow, those big guys on those teams, I can't imagine another team coming in without a 7-foot+ person to guard or challenge them. It's just a mess. Complete.
Evidently, Connecticut is very serious about basketball. That's all I could figure out because the women's made the Final Four and the men won. That's all I knew. Like, who knew? But Connecticut.
Maybe serious enough there should be an investigation on illegal recruiting practices.
No, I think they said the men won back-to-back, and this is like their 6th national championship or something. So
you are well-versed in this. This
was
impressive.
on Fox News this morning.
Oh, got it. I thought
Dana does sports. Okay, that was Dana does sports.
Got it. Huh. Well, I can see that. I noticed something on Fox News that you and I would have both already been aware of, but he's up and doing it again, and that's your president Joe is now being accused of trying to buy the young vote as he continues to throw out more dismissal of student loans.
After the Supreme Court told him he couldn't do it.
Yeah, $146 billion. So I'm thoroughly confused. I don't understand how this works. When the Supreme Court comes out against it, there's footage of Pelosi explaining that the president can't forgive debt. They can delay it, like let's push off payments, and yet he continues to do it. So who's in charge? Who decides whether you can or can't do that if it's not the Supreme Court?
I thought the Supreme Court was the final law of the land. What do I know?
That was my thought as well. I think we're in a very bad place. That's what I think. There was some good news politically.
Oh, okay.
$50 million.
Yeah.
One night.
50.5.
50.5.
Correct.
Mr. Trump gathers up in one evening, and obviously you can manipulate those numbers and say, hey, let's wait until then to donate. But irregardless, it's a pretty impressive number.
Some people say it's the biggest haul in one evening ever in political history. I don't know. I'm not a fact checker. I don't know that. I know that Obama and Clinton and Biden had a thing like a week or so ago, and they got like 20-something million. And so he shows up with Melania and got 50.5. But I don't think it puts them even in the war chest total. But I'm going to state again that if it is these two people that are running against each other, and I'm firmly convinced that it's going to be Trump. I'm every day that passes, I keep thinking that something on Biden to keep him from running, but he's still in it. I don't think advertising is going to do anything for either one of those candidates. Like, everybody knows who they are. This is not, I don't think dollars is going to have any effect whatsoever, unless in terms of advertising. Now, if they use those dollars for ground games and, all that, that is a completely different scenario. But
and I agree 100%. I'm not saying I wouldn't advertise at all, but I'm with you. There's not many people going to change off an ad at this point. But to reinforce that ground game, basically get out the vote. That's where I'd take every dollar. I don't know what's legal and what's not, but get them to the polls, have them send back their mail-in ballot, whatever needs to be done. Take that money, and I don't know how you use it for some of those things. Provide transportation. I don't know what's legal and what's not, but I assume you can provide transportation. Maybe take them to McDonald's afterwards. I don't know, but if the Democrats are going to do their best to buy the vote, and I'm pretty sure they're going to, we probably ought to on the other side of the aisle fight back just a little bit as well.
Well, you were talking about that Biden's forgiving more student debt when the Supreme Court don't. Again, I don't know who's in charge or what goes on there, but so the Pope. I don't know if you saw this, but the Pope sent out this document that they've been working on for 5 years, and it's about abortion and transgenderism and all these things. Well, the Pope basically says that if God assigns who you are and it's a gift from God, and any changing to that is against the Catholic Church and God. Okay. So that clearly says, I don't know the official wording. I read it, but anyway, that clearly says to me that he is against this whole transgender woke culture. I mean, that's what it says. The Biden press secretary, she said, no, we're wrong. I was like, okay, whatever.
I think that obviously, I think historically everybody's aware where the Catholic Church has stood on that. And I think that was the most politically correct way the Pope could word it. Does that ring positive?
Well, I mean, but it doesn't matter whether politically correct or not. He said,
no, I'm just saying he didn't come out as harsh as this. You're going to hell and everything else if this has happened.
No, but he said that was against God's plans and the church. So,
you know what else? I think I saw him say something about you're not supposed to carry a purse if you're a boy.
I didn't.
Yeah.
My purse got stolen in Louisville. I haven't replaced it yet. So there you go. I'm following the Pope's orders.
You're on it.
But, yeah, no. So I don't know, but those people, they're just crazy.
So I've enjoyed the little clips, and I'm guilty of not going to CNN and MSNBC and all those and watching very often. But I do get the clips on Fox on their mental breakdowns every time there is something positive Trump or negative Biden. They're falling apart emotionally.
Oh, they have a mental breakdown at least once a week on all the other networks.
Yeah, that's great. I hope it continues. Are there any legal battles? Obviously, Trump is still in legal battles. I haven't kept up with it. Is there anything pressing right now that we need to be concerned with that actually would get enough traction to get him off the ballot? Is there anything at all out there left that can keep him off the ballot?
I don't. I've been over this with you like 5,000 times. You clearly do not understand the qualifications for running for president.
I understand that, but I believe there's always going to be challenges that I guess I should reword that thing. Is there going to be another decision the Supreme Court will have to make in order to determine if he can be on the ballot or not?
No, they already determined he's on the ballot. That's done.
I'm aware of that, but there'll be more cases coming that I believe will be challenged. Not from manipulating the vote or questioning the vote, but just I guess that maybe that's correct. Maybe that's the only one that can come into play there.
That's why they took that case.
Agreed. No, that makes sense, and you're right. The qualifications go back to it. That's the only one that could do it.
I mean, the man could be sitting in a jail cell and be elected president. It has nothing. There's nothing,
and that's hard for me to wrap my head around. But that is accurate.
There's very few qualifications on what you have to do to be president. Okay, I'm just telling.
That's why you haven't talked about our other candidate lately, our independent. I believe he's independent. Joe Exotic. He's legally running, and I believe he's still in prison.
And yeah. Your favorite podcast, Joe Rogan. I don't listen to podcasts at all, but evidently he was on with some Democrat, and they both say that they're kicking Biden out in May.
Really?
Yeah, that's what they say.
Pretty
I don't
soon.
know why May.
Obviously.
I don't know what they didn't. I didn't listen to it. I just got the headlines, and it's going to be May, they say.
I did not hear that. I'm interested to dig into that a little more. I've probably heard less about it recently, but maybe because I'm not as focused on it as I was earlier. But I still have a hard time believing, as you stated earlier, that something won't happen. I watched clips when he's going to the different homes and eating with an Italian family or a Mexican family or whatever, and he's just so not there. I can't imagine what the people that sit down and talk to him think. I would like a one-on-one conversation with him. You think you can arrange that?
I don't think so.
Would you not be interested just to sit down and observe him communicate with other people or yourself? Wouldn't that be?
I don't want to communicate with Biden. Is that what you're asking me?
I do. I want to see how. I want firsthand knowledge of his lack thereof cognitive abilities.
Huh.
I think we can see it pretty clearly every day on the news, but I would like to see it in person, because people that are meeting with him more times than not are probably on the left, and none of them are coming out and saying he's lost it. Outside of RFK, probably.
And I think there's a bunch more people that I've heard that says he's senile and all those other things. I don't know.
I think they're aware of it. I believe until it's time to oust him, I don't know that you're going to hear as much. What about the audio tapes that they're wanting to get on his investigation, just so that I think they're wanting to obviously release it to the public, but I think those audio tapes and his ability to speak and answer questions must have been even worse than what we envision.
I'd not seen anything on the audio tape, so I don't know.
The DOJ says he's not releasing them. So maybe we'll never see him. Congress requested him. There's another situation. I don't know who wins. Does Congress have more power than DOJ over something like that? You would assume, like you said earlier, the Supreme Court says you can't forgive college loans. Joe continues to do it. I think it's a real mess there on who's supposed to be the policeman on that.
Don't ask me.
I don't know. I really think it's an issue. I'm sure there's legal authorities out there that can guide us, but I cannot imagine there's any. I always thought the Supreme Court was it. That's the final decision. It's done. Period.
So just to clarify, so we can put this to bed and you don't ever bring it up again. Here are the requirements for presidential candidates. Must be a natural born citizen of the United States. Must be at least 35 years old. Have been a resident of the United States for 14 years. That is it. That is all.
Pretty minimal.
So I don't want to hear out of your mouth again that Trump can't run for president.
I will do my best. I mean, to me, that I don't believe they're going to give up on anything. Not that there's anything they can do at this point. But wow, they're going to hit desperation and throw everything that they have and continue to throw everything they have. And thank God nothing sticking too hard so far. Well, that is most of all I have on current events. Do you have anything else?
No, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot going on, but
would you like to promote the California, Arizona stock show kids a little bit?
Sure. I'm going to do the top 10 novice cattle as of right now. First place is Billy Smith from California. Second place is Riley Purvis of Mississippi. Third place is Wesleyan Elliott of Texas. Fourth place is Addison Poe of Texas. Fifth place is Decker Guerra of California. Sixth place is Logan Amos of California. Next is Scarlett Vance of Texas. After that, we have Lakin Piper of West Virginia, followed by Sawyer McGrew of Pennsylvania, and then Cameron Brown of Texas.
Not bad. Congratulations to our novice cattle showman. Novice, what age is that and under?
9 and under.
9 and under. So technically not like 4-H age or major age.
Well, no, 9-year-olds are.
Let's go. 8
No.
not. And while we're on that, can I ask one more question about tech?
Mm-hmm.
So is it, and we went over this and my memory is terrible. It is by grade. So your senior year, you're done. If
Right.
a student is held back in third grade, is it still their senior year? We talked about this once.
As far as you cannot have graduated high school. That is it.
And what about the homeschool kids? I mean, obviously, they're assigned a grade, but
that is an issue that comes up in those few or whatever, because some people try to like stretch it and all that other stuff. But what I understand is cannot have graduated high school.
You would assume they'd tie an age to it as well would allow plenty of time to graduate. I don't know. I need to look that. I'm curious about that. I'm sure our listeners, there's plenty of them out there, probably ag teachers or 4-H extension people that know, but I am curious about that because I have no doubt, obviously, there are some that will try to manipulate that to get one more year and so forth out of it. But that's curious. I'm curious to that because we always, and the rest of the world doesn't see this way. Like Ryan, when it's a senior year, just like my daughter Katie's senior year is next year, which is a big deal, but it really doesn't. The shows that she shows at, there are very few shows she won't be able to show one more year past her senior year. Where in Texas, it's just it. You're done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming jackpots you can show older. I don't know if there's any rules or things on those individually, but it's different everywhere else, I guess, is what I was getting at. I would like to thank our longest running sponsor, ShowFresh H2O. If you enjoy this podcast, give ShowFresh H2O a try. It is a low-cost approach that will neutralize the chlorinated water and in turn allow show stock to consume more fluids. ShowFresh H2O can be found at your local farm store, supply trailer, or swampfox.com. This is a topic, and again, we have 200 and some episodes. I don't even know what number we're on, Ryan, but many episodes. I remember talking about this topic once, I believe, with Mr. Fugate and maybe Cade, maybe Chase. I'm not sure who. But I'm excited to visit with Ryan about this, and the more thought that I put into this, it needs addressed. And today is structural scrutiny. Basically, let's discuss skeletal correctness, skeletal integrity, structural correctness, however you want to term it. And I want to open it up by the manner that part of the reason I would like to discuss this, I believe it is misunderstood, and maybe even more so defined by each individual differently. And I think many people out there that are exhibiting livestock across species, when a judge talks about this one structurally correct or has the best skeletal integrity, assumes from judge to judge they're talking about the same thing. And I think within reason they are, but I think we can break that down, Ryan. And to me, I did a quick survey. I shot some text out and called a few people that are basically judging on every level that I have respect for, just to get an idea. Hey, what when you talk about skeletal integrity or structural correctness, tell me exactly what give me your real short 2 or 3 sentences. Here's what you're referring to. And there's a lot of variation out there. I think we see a lot of variation when we go from show to show and judge to judge across species. And Ryan, I would venture to guess your issues watching shows are largely in part as much in when skeletal integrity is being described as maybe anything else.
I would think that's the thing. My deal with this is, I think Dale and I are going to have different takes, and that's fine because we normally have different takes. But like, I think there are lots of different structural issues that go across all species. It's identifying those correctly on the microphone or when you're selecting them. And there is and I say this at most shows, I'm very critical on structure because of lots of things, but basically everything in life is genetics and environment. And so my environment that I was raised in, all this other stuff, has put me at this thing where I'm super hypercritical on structure. But like, identifying it correctly is one thing, then talking it the other. But my main thing is, in terms of if we're going as far as judging, like what I try to dissect and figure out when I'm watching a show is, okay, this person is all right if they're too straight through their shoulder and their knee, but a snapping pattern is a no-go for that person. Like, what I try to do is figure out the line. Where is their not only their line of acceptability, like this one is acceptable in terms of structure for that person standing out in the ring. This one is not. So when the next group rolls in, I can say, that one's not good enough. That one is good enough. All this other stuff. But even within that, I know exactly the things that I can tolerate more in terms of structural issues than others. But I want to be able to identify that in other judges through not only their placing, but what they say on the mic. And I don't think that's a lot to ask. I really don't. But
I really like how you broke that down, Ryan, that every judge is going something. And if I'm taking it correctly, if one's a little straighter fronted and the judge acknowledges they're okay a little that way, no big deal.
Right. Because it's just their opinion.
Yes.
And so, but if like they acknowledge that and say, you know what, I know this one isn't perfect through his shoulder and knee, but it's okay for me. And they stay with that, then I am perfectly fine. Okay, yes, I get it.
I like how you presented that. That is very well done, and I think we need to understand that. Just like a certain degree of muscle is good for one judge and maybe not another. It's all the same. But sometimes I think on the skeleton we do draw maybe harder lines, or we assume there's harder lines drawn. And when a judge accepts something that isn't perfect, they think, well, they've lost it. Well, to me, like you stated, if they're acknowledging this is where it's at, and I'm okay there to get A, B, and C along with it, have at it.
Right. Like I said, it's just an opinion. It's that person's opinion. It's not my opinion. I don't have to agree with it, but I want to be able to understand. Like, okay, don't in one class say, this one is in like up in the top, first or second. I don't care. And I know that there are better ones behind him in terms of their knee and their shoulder alignment, all this other stuff. But I am okay where this one is. And use that steer, hog, whatever, up there in the top of the class. And then the next class, same issue happens, and that one's 7th. That is what drives me crazy. I'm like, why? And
go ahead.
There's no explanation as to why. And that is the things that drive me insane.
and I get it, and I think you're evaluating it more than most sitting in the stand. So I understand that, but I like the concept how you described each person's going to be a little different, and just is, and how they grew up, their environment. I remember talking with you. I thought it was on the podcast. Maybe it had been personally. You talk about your emphasis on skeletal correctness or integrity or build or movement. In the environment you grew up in, you're more critical of it because of why?
Because the steers that I had to show, and it's not only, I mean, I won a lot and should have won a lot. It wasn't like but like at that time, it was all about muscle and very little about structure.
Most steers in that era, we won't even tell what years. That statement right there, they just, I'm not saying all of them were, but for the most part, they were. They were
right. It was, and especially because the last 5 years of my career was when we slick sheared, and so that threw, big wrench into it or whatever. But even in the haired ones, it was about muscle and not as much about structure. Well, and I just had a conversation with a guy that worked for me as a child at a backdrop, and they had a reserve and division, and he's like, yeah, I thought that one was on the line. I said, yeah, well, y'all also thought all those sumbitches I showed were on the line, but y'all don't have to show the structure out of them. And I did. And so, I mean, I was just joking with him, and stuff like that. But I mean, that is true. Like it is much, much more difficult to show an animal that has structure problems. And there are very few things that you can do, but you can do some things. But it is very, very hard. And since in my era, it was all about muscle and very little about structure, I was forced into that. And that is why I am so critical. I've made no bones about it. Like, I didn't like showing those.
I love the transparency there. And that is absolutely an accurate statement. And where the show ring is today, you can make a strong case for the fact of exactly what you said. It is more difficult. It doesn't matter what species. Think about trying to drive a crippled pig that wants to go squeal in the corner or whatever it may be. It is more difficult, period. So with that said, selecting those animals that have effortless movement and better build and all those things, much, much easier to get shown. I think it's a little bit odd because, and I didn't show as much as a 4-H or FFA member, not even as involved in the ring as obviously that I am now with my children and helping other families. But more of mine comes from the fact that the skeletal correctness ties to longevity and the breeding side. And I can take the commercial world and just detach it. I'm gonna give you that one right now. Not even going to the commercial side, but just an advocate for structurally well-built animals in terms of longevity for the poor people that are raising show stock. And I know we can say, well, we can let litter size and pigs get down to 1 or 2 as long as we sell those 1 or 2 for a huge amount of money. We can say that sow, maybe she's not going to hold up through more than 1 or 2 parities because she's just not built well enough to do so. Maybe that dang billy goat looks great at 50, 100 pounds, maybe even 110, but once he gets mature, things start to go all wrong, and you're not going to be able to keep him around and keep him functional long enough. All of those things. So set the commercial real world aside and just take a perspective of the people breeding show stock. I would personally like to be able to make animals that are going to have a little more longevity that's tied to skeletal soundness. I believe I was having a conversation with Matt Clays the other day, and he'd asked me what was the number one factor that cattle are cold or cows are cold. And I mean, made it very obvious. It's if they don't breed back, fertility. I agree 100%. I think that just the statistics are out there, but go a little bit deeper. Why aren't they fertile? Are they having structural issues that there's arthritis, pain causing cortisol levels to interfere with reproductive hormones? Are they skinny because they can't harvest enough pasture, whatever it may be? But I think structural integrity and the ability and effort it takes to move from point A to B impacts so many things, not only in the show ring and the ease of getting one shown, but for that producer that's trying to make those show stock. And then you can go all the way on into the commercial world to a certain extent. So I like it from a longevity standpoint. And Ryan, if I want to throw all of that out, and I think you and I, this will be something we agree on. I absolutely, and I don't care what species it is, love watching that animal hit the ring that looks effortless in terms of their movement. Like it takes no extra energy or effort whatsoever. They just go. And that to me is attractive.
Oh yeah. Very. I mean, but again, I can handle if somebody like I dig that, you dig that. I wish everybody would dig that, but you don't have to because it's just an opinion. Like I get it's just an opinion, and it is that one person's opinion. But my reason for bringing this topic up to Dale, because it was his deal, is like I do want to be able, if the person is out there judging and I am watching, I do want, and I think that everyone should be able to dissect and diagnose, all right, this is the line of acceptability for this judge. These are things that we're willing to like say, you know what, I know it's not perfect, but I'm okay with it. But these other structural issues, yeah, I'm not having it. And I don't think that's too much to ask, but I'm proven wrong a lot of times. So
no, I think so. That's a really good approach. I think just discussing this, maybe we'll see some more of that. And I want to go a little deeper. And you were very open, and I think it's the second time you did. You talked about just how difficult it is to show those animals and the time period you were showing, and the animals that just wasn't a priority, and it was fine. Those are the kind that are still winning. I think if you look at, and I was visiting with a friend this morning actually about this topic. Depending on what era you're coming from, depending on who your judging coach were, maybe what your parents put priorities on, or your mentor when you first started to learn how to evaluate livestock, a lot of those things will stick with you. And it's interesting to me, if you go to the older generation that's maybe a little more commercially tied, I think that this individual used the term cowboy structure. They just need to be able to perform and get from point A to B. It doesn't need to look pretty, anything like that, but they need to survive. And he took it to the other one, that the youth, let's go to 30 and under. Ryan, you're right there on that line, I think, 30 and under. The comment was made, if they're flat, squishy pastern and long-necked, which I don't know where the long neck comes in, but in general, we're good enough built. We're good there. So there are different perceptions, and as Ryan stated, genetics and environment control that. I do believe there are some people that are influenced by their judging team coach at a junior college or senior college, or the example Ryan gave, their experiences in the show ring. There are plenty of kids that are growing up in a commercial world, and animals have to be built a certain way, and the environment they're raised in to survive. All of those things are going to be different, and hence no problem with different people allowing different things. But like Ryan talked about, just describe some of those things. And I think people are going to be more accepting of it. Not maybe as broad of a term that this one is structurally more correct. That tells me in general, this one's probably put together better. But I think, Ryan, your indication, instead of that broad term, let's just talk about where they're good or bad, or maybe where that issue is that I'm okay with or not okay with.
Well, and you brought up a trigger for me. So anyway, this squishy pastern nonsense. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you talked about how it's different for every judge, and I agree with that, whatever. But like, so and this is probably part of my issues, but anyway, when I think of a squishy pastern animal, I think of one that like doesn't have enough stability and strength in the pastern, so the dew claws are like on the dirt touching the shavings or whatever. And so whenever they say that, I mean, I'm the first one looking like, okay. And I get that's a term that's used a lot. It just drives me crazy. But I think if they are flexible, I think they're using that squishy to be a cool word for flexible that everybody uses. But if they are flexible in their pastern, I'm fine with it, them saying that. But it's when they use the term squishy and use those, and it's past flexible, it's broken or weak or soft or all those. Soft and squishy are synonyms. Y'all do realize this, people. I'm just letting you know. But that it's stuff like that sends me into an orbit. I'm like,
but I believe in what you're saying. They're using it as a positive, and when they use that term, it takes you another direction.
Right.
Completely another. And I get it. I'm going to use a term, and I don't know that they're using a lot, almost flat pastern or flat footed or whatever. They come all the way down. When Ryan's talking about squishy, he's thinking that they're setting back almost on their dew claw. And the problem is, they're all the way down there, but there's not necessarily enough strength to come back up when we go into motion. It's just flat, flat, flat. And I can take it a bit further, and I will use hogs because I see it more prevalent there. As we straighten the shoulder out in a hog and straighten that front knee, and we try to do things that we think are really cool in the show ring, and they are things that are hard to make, whether it be opening in the way up, making that neck jerked way up there, cleaning the chest and pushing the chest floor up, all of these things. When we straighten the shoulder / knee and there is no flexibility up there, it's not built right up high, I believe hogs break down a little more in their pastern because that's all the animal can do to compensate for some other issues. So they become almost flat-footed in some cases because they're screwed up elsewhere, but being flat-footed allows them to move a little and get along better. Same thing with the straight rear hock. So it's interesting to me how all of these things tie together, and it becomes very, very complicated, and there's going to be a lot of different opinions on it. But we can stretch tendons and we can stretch ligaments out. For example, I was born club-footed, I guess you'd call it, but as my parents describe it, my whole leg was almost twisted up onto where my knee, it was screwed up pretty bad. And obviously bone at an early age is flexible and you can bend it and so forth. And right now I don't feel any, I don't notice that I ever had a club foot or any issues, but they had taken a chunk of my tendon out, spliced it down the middle, put it back in to take it from a certain length to double the length of whatever section they cut out. And just to give me that ability so my foot didn't turn in. But I think the same thing in livestock, and we can do certain things. If you're really screwed up somewhere, you're going to put all the pressure, like in that hog that I'm talking about, all the pressure is all of a sudden being applied basically to where the animal hits the ground in that pastern. And when you put that much pressure there, those tendons or those ligaments are going to stretch and stretch and stretch to the point where what Ryan would call it squishy footed, where others would say that's maybe a good thing, but there is a fine line. Ryan, do you see him call squishy footed even when the dew claw is hitting the ground?
Yeah,
as a positive.
And that's when I go, because I don't like that term. I've made it very clear I don't like that term. I think because I see that as a negative. Like when I hear that is a negative connotation to me. And so when they say something like that, I'm the first one to like jump on there and look and like, okay. And it's about half and half, 60-40, whatever that like, okay, they're using that for flexible and that one's fine, whatever. But then they're like, yeah, this one's squishy footed and pastured and all. And the dew claw's there on the ground. I'm like, yeah, no. You're saying that as the reason this one's being placed high, and that's not good, sir.
May I share one thing that I may have noticed in the swine side of it? In order to not allow the dew claw to hit the ground, guess what sometimes might be done?
Go right ahead, sir.
I think we're removing the dew claw or altering the dew claw a little bit to make it a little less noticeable. Like in puppies, you cut dew claws off, no big deal. You can do that in several breeds. It's just kind of normal.
Oh,
but no, that's in there. And I think, and I'm terrible about this when I go to South America or when I'm looking through cattle that I'm interested in purchasing or just studying, I do find too many cattle that are up and over on their pastern and pop into it. Arguably, people will say, well, as cows, when you get them out on dirt in the pasture and there's no longer any stressors and they're not growing real rapidly, that all comes back into them. And I think that's pretty close to being correct most of the time. But it does bother me when I see them kind of come over in that pastern and take a stumble step because of it and then pop in. You can hear it across the ring. I don't like that. So I'm going to want a flexible pastern as much as anybody, but not just a flexible pastern. I think that's an easy place to see it. I think it's easier for judges and livestock enthusiasts and breeders to see flexibility in the pastern before they see flexibility in a front knee or a rear hock, and maybe I'm wrong, but I have to focus more to see that. And when I see a bull out in a pasture, and I can think of just certain images, when they go into motion and they pick that entire front foot up and that hoof flips all the way up and then back down and the knee bends right, we go to the back or the rear leg, and there's not just a correct set to the hind leg where the hock is, but that hock actually, we have flexibility to it. And not all animals that are set underneath themselves or have angle when they're standing there actually flex in their hock, but the ones that truly flex back and forth, those animals, their head stays in one position, their top line, it's almost like all the flexibility in their lower body allows their upper body to just stay in that exact same position and look effortless. People, you watch the downhill moguls, the big bumps and the ski runs, those skiers that can go down those moguls and their head is almost staying in the same position, even though their lower body their knees are going down. All that flexibility is happening there. A long distance runner that stays so stable in terms of their upper body. It's amazing to me how flexibility down low allows everything up top to look like it's not even being impacted. Where if we don't have that, it's almost like the animal has to swing its whole spine, its hip, struggle to lift that front end by manipulating the upper shoulder. Everything has to move when those joints aren't put together at the right angles and they don't have the flexibility to their ligaments and all those things to do that. And that, Ryan, goes back to what I'm talking about, that effortless motion when they come in the ring. I don't know if there's anything that hits me harder, especially if they got their head up, a little bit arrogant, and they're just floating with it looks like zero effort that they could keep going forever.
Yeah, but we're in the minority, so you need to move off of that.
No, we should not be. That should be a priority. I'm gonna dig in on this one. I wish it was, because I like it. That hits me so hard. I can't even explain it. The other thing, Ryan, so we're in the minority. I took some time. This one, when we decided this was a topic yesterday or whenever we decided, I actually went online. And there's places that you can there's judges that are interviewed. What are you looking for, et cetera. Do you want to know the number one thing? And I probably pulled up 15 of them, Ryan. When you ask the judge, and it doesn't matter what species, I didn't just go to one species. What do you think their number one priority is? Or what do they, in their interview, when they answer a question, what do you think their number one priority is and what they're looking for?
I don't read those interviews because they're all false. So I don't know.
Ryan, I did not come up, to my knowledge, and I looked at least 15. There wasn't one of them that skeletal integrity, structural correctness, movement, however you want to term it, I think it was first on every single one of them. And I'm going to tell you right now that is very popular to talk about. And this is going to take you back and get you irritated. I will hear people talk about it in the show ring. And like you, I'm looking at the animals and it has no relevance. So it is a very hot, popular topic. Everybody wants to hang their hat that they're going to sort them on skeleton and quality. In every single one of those interviews, that was their first priority. And I promise you, I don't even remember which of the 15 I looked at, but just statistically, I know that if you were to watch those 15 judges, that would not hold true. Can you agree with that?
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't know who you looked at or anything, but that's why I said I don't read those interviews, because they all, and anybody would do the same. Like they're going to say the ideal and, I look for structure and it's all a bunch of fake news. And so that's why I don't read those things. And that is why I think it is very important to analyze the person when they're out there, because, and I'm not saying don't read those interviews. I have found them not to be true or believable, because I think they are putting out there what they want people to hear. And anybody in that situation would. I'm not saying they're bad for it, but that's why I think it is so critical that when you're out there actually doing it, not just for people like me that are crazy and do hang on every word and pay attention, but I have said this a lot. I'm in the less than 1%, and I get that. But what is 100% is every person there, every mom, every dad, every kid, every whatever, that on their animal, they're going to pay attention. And I assure you, they know their animal's faults better than you do because they've been with that animal every single day since they brought it home. And they do know it. They may not want to admit it all times, but they do know the shortcomings and the issues with their animal. And so that's why you have to, like, whatever you're going to say on that animal, it better be 100% correct. And the number of times it's not is just really disappointing.
No, that's interesting. I want to pose a question to you. I think I know what your answer is, but I think if you were to pose this to a lot of different judges, we would get some different answers, and I'm not sure how to word it. So when we talk about skeletal integrity and everything we're talking about today, I'm going to probably study that more on the move, but obviously when we get one stuck and get them propped up, there's certain angles and lines that we like to see that in theory we would call them structurally correct. I would say if we're strong out of the shoulder, strong on the top, level hip, would that be a structurally correct top line in most people's opinion when they're stuck?
Probably.
Do you think sometimes maybe more emphasis is put on what they see when that animal's stuck in the profile than on the move?
I think in sheep, goats, and cattle, yes. I mean, hogs are continuously moving, so they're screwed. Yeah. But yeah, I think there's way too much decision making on structure when they're stopped than when they are in motion. And I think the reason for that, and don't be mad at the judge, be mad at the system or whatever, but I would say it's probably 75% of the time in the ring, those animals are stopped. Agreed.
And they don't have to be. If the judge wants to walk them more, they can walk them more.
I mean, they can walk them more, but then
but
what is the first? Okay, but hold on. Now, like, we know perception is reality, and I'm just going to put this out there. The first thing that people think when a judge continuously walks animals is they're lost and they don't know what to do.
Buying time to figure it out.
Yes. And I'm not saying that is true, but I am telling you that is the perception. And I think that factors in to all of this. But, I think because we're getting long already, I think we've kind of got a little off. And the things that I wanted to bring up was like, across species or whatever, like we've discussed, if an animal is too straight through their shoulder and knee, is that acceptable to some judges? Is that acceptable to others? Sure. Not others. I get that. But when they come over, right, when they're actually bucked over, I can't tell you how many times just this year that I have been judging a show and said, this one is over on the offside front knee or show side front knee, etc., all this other stuff. And while it's there and everybody can see it, like, I don't think people get that is not good. It's really, really not good. And, the same thing you talked about hocks, and if they're a little straighter in their hock, or, what is that acceptable? Some judges not. Yeah. Snapping of pasterns. It drives me crazy when one snaps pasterns, but I know other people that they would much rather, they can handle that more than they can a straight front and all this other stuff. You talked about just a second ago, is a strong top line and a level hip. something that people think makes that animal good structured. Okay, yes. But how many times, especially again, hogs are out on this because they're constantly in motion, but how many times do we see an exhibitor loin one, push a goat's top down, push a sheep's top down, all this other stuff to give it that perfect look when they're not? Like, all of that is baked in this. And I just think, and talking about, you talked about that there are angles that can make whatever people, I don't know if the vast majority of people realize this, but you can adjust the angle to a sheep, goat, calf's front end from the way it's going to be viewed on the side view. Like, you can move it one way or the other, that from that judge's position where they are, they're going to look more acceptable in that angle. Like, all of this is there.
Yeah, absolutely. All can be manipulated by a good showman. And throw some hair or leg wool on there and allow somebody that can clip well. Put that influence into it as well. You can get one that's not very good in that front knee, whether it's coming over, whether it's coming in, with enough hair, with a good showman, all those things. You can prop them up to take a pretty good picture. But what you can't do is alter necessarily how that's going to work when they go into motion.
Right.
And there, I think you and I would both agree that I would prefer, and again, it's personal preference. Everybody can do what they want. I would prefer, I'm not saying we don't need to set the animals up, but I would prefer to see them move more, and I will oftentimes maybe have them walk a little more, because I want to evaluate their skeletal integrity on the move, because showmen are so good. And I think each year showmen historically have gotten better and better leg wool, hair, ability to clip some set to that rear hock. All of the things we can do via fitting has made it so we can make them look really, really good propped up. And I think a lot of animals are bought. Think about the online sales. Think about everything. It's usually a profile picture is what's at least going to be in front of your face. I know there's videos and other things that come with it, but we are programmed a little bit. Wow, that one takes a good picture. That one's really looks good on the profile. Where if we ask to go into motion or we study a little bit harder, it does, but it's because that's a good showman or that's got enough hair to cover things up. There's a lot of that. When I watch goats come at me at a show that I'm not judging, I can look at those out there on the profile from a distance. I think, well, they look fine. And then I am in the right position where they're coming right at me. And I look at some of these that are so opened up in that front end and come in so bad or over in that knee. And it's just a train wreck when they go into motion and come at you. So I think it's interesting, Ryan, as showmen have gotten progressively better, hair, leg wool, whatever you want to talk about, and the fitting abilities to hide some of those structural issues with that, it lends us to need to study them a little bit more on the move. So with that said, we know that in our market animals and even our breeding animals, we have a different purpose for these animals than what Mother Nature determined long ago. Mother Nature says propagation of that species and continuation of it. So if I'm going to say what's a true sound, effortless moving animal, it's going to be a lot of these really narrow based, if you're talking about hoof stock that are really narrow chested, narrow behind. We would call them frail. We'd call them a lot of things, but functionally very, very sound and able to get from point A to B and survive in the nature's world. We have to put muscle on them because muscle is meat, and that's the main reason we're producing these animals, or was at one time, not just show animals. And when we open them up to put more muscle on, it's harder. It's harder to make those joints right. It's harder to keep them inside their skeleton. It's harder to do all of those things. So it's an interesting battle. We're trying to make them look a certain way, and we're going against maybe what has been selected for by those animals' ancestors for thousands of years. It's all intriguing to me. And I think what you had said earlier, we spend most of our time looking at those animals propped up. I watched the last show I was at, the Spring American Royal. Peyton Dahmer was judging the lamb show. And I stood back and I'm looking at, I don't know, maybe he had his top 5 sheep out there, and I'm over at the goat ring just kind of looking over the ring into that. And there's 5 young people that have these sheep propped up near perfectly. There was a lot of shapes and sizes and differences out amongst those 5 that you could have priorities on. But wow, in terms of of saying differences in their skeletal build, as well as they had them propped up, as much leg wool is on there. I don't know that you can break it down. They're doing it's being done too well that we have to watch them go into motion. That was long. I apologize, but I feel very strongly, if people want to talk about the skeletal build, that maybe we need to pay more attention to it and how it's actually functioning. Maybe what I call form to function, that it needs to actually be worked, not just look okay because of how we fit. And I'm going to do the same thing. My kids will do everything to fit them right and get that perfect picture, all of those things. But let's go one more step. Let's just make sure what we're seeing when they're propped up holds true when we go into motion.
No, yeah. And I agree with that. But I go back to, you're talking about how good these showmen are and how good these clippers are and all this other stuff. And I discussed the fact that if a judge walks them a lot, then people think that they're lost or they're buying time trying to figure out what to do, all this other stuff, and yada, yada, yada. In terms of sheep and goats, I do this a lot, and then I'm going to give a compliment to another person that I saw. A lot of times when it gets close, I will tell those showmen just to back off and hold the heads. And you want to talk about kids and parents and fitters and breeders flip out, they flip out. When you ask them to do that, I mean, they like, wah! And they think that like the Russians are coming over the causeway and the end of the world is near. But just like you said, when we don't have them locked up in brace and doing everything to make them look picture perfect, and they just have to stand there, sometimes that's as good as walking them, especially in sheep and goats. And Harlan Yoakum did the Louisville Market Weather Show, and he did that almost every class. And I was like, okay, and I'm not saying other people don't do that. There may be way more than I know, but he's one of the only other people that I've ever seen do that. And I was like, look, I'm not alone in this. And so I think that is something that probably is underutilized, is what I'm saying.
No, I would agree. I see more and more people doing it. Most, I guess, when I think about the majors, where some of the more recent shows, most of them are doing it. And there's a little bit of some of the showmen, Ryan, and you've seen it, you get it. Some of them are so good about grabbing that head and pushing it back into them that they can still keep them pretty well stuck. But if you truly just make them back off and let that animal relax. And you've mentioned this before, and I think we both mentioned it. Sometimes when they pull those top 5 to head to the scale. Some of those kids have got them pretty well propped up waiting in line, and others are just kind of standing there. It's a pretty true tell, and I can't think of very many judges that won't look over there at that line when they're lined up to go to the scale, given the opportunity. And why are they doing that? Because they want to see them natural. It's interesting to me. Ryan, you are probably, you're not probably, you are too young, and maybe you'll prove me wrong. Right when I first started judging in my college days, junior, senior, even into grad school, I caught the very back end of this. But it wasn't uncommon for certain judges that were judging a lot of shows at this time. And I only remember this, goats weren't a thing. But in the market lamb ring, at state fair level, I don't remember it at a national show, but I've seen it at the state fair level. They get down their top 2 or 3 market lambs. You know where I'm going with it, don't you? I
do not.
They asked to turn them loose. They wanted to see them.
I've never seen that before.
Have you ever even heard that it happened?
No.
I've witnessed it myself.
Wait, I take that back. I did get a text message or a Snapchat like over a year ago about somebody that said that this happened, or maybe it was a Facebook message or whatever, that they were just furious about it. So that's the only time. But no, I did not know that was a thing.
It was, and I'm not saying a lot of judges did it, but it wasn't. You weren't shocked when you saw it in the market lamb ring for a 3 or 4 year period right there. And I will tell you, because I saw prominent judges do it, I'm throwing myself under the bus here. I can remember doing jackpot shows, and I got to the top end and a couple pretty good ones. I have done that very, very long ago. I don't know that I agree with it, because I want showmanship to be a part. I want all those things to be a part of it. But you want me to tell you how easy it is to sort those top few when you do that?
Oh, I'm sure it's super easy. My issue with this is, okay, I know how difficult it is to catch a sheep or goat when they get loose. I can't imagine turning 5 of them loose.
Yeah. And usually it was 1 or 2 or 3, just the top end. And sometimes, I mean, the ring help.
And maybe the ring help was better back then. But I'm just saying with the current ring help right now, this would be a disaster. And
it was almost like some of the judges were smart enough to just kind of take them over to a corner, and you've kind of got the ring help that they're just going to be loose over in that section for the most part. But it is just, it's not even fair to the judge, because we can, as people showing them, as breeders, as enthusiasts, as people back in the barn, when we can just look at them in their natural state and see all those problems, we're the showmen are doing everything possible to hide that from the judge, and the judge is trying to sort through it. It's much more difficult in the ring to pick those animals apart than it is when they're standing back in their pen. That's a given. So that's interesting to me. Ryan, I know we're getting long.
You're going to be very disappointed, Dale. I am not going to ask the goat exhibitors at the Goat Junior National to let their animals go.
I agree. I'm not saying we should do it, but I promise you the better ones, we would use more better built animals. Okay. In the cattle ring, you hear this, you've heard this all your life. I predict they cover their track. Can you explain to our listeners what that means?
I think the older I get, I think it means different things to different people. Yes. But in general, I think that when that term is used, it is mean that ideally where their back foot goes where their front foot placed down.
Pretty much set that hoof print. You can just look at the hoof print, and you know what? In when I think of game trails, I think of cow pass, things like that. It makes sense that that's a logical thing. We're less likely to take an off step if we're not covering as much ground, all those things. But there are a lot of people that hold very true to that. I can remember when I was in junior college going to different cattle breeders, that was something that many of them would talk about. They want to see that. And I think it does indicate there's some flexibility in taking a longer stride. Maybe that basically, if they can do that, we assume they're taking a pretty long stride. I think that's a safe assessment. Another one I want to say something about, and I don't even know how to necessarily approach it. In our way of thinking as a human, as a stock show judge, as the show ring has evolved, we tend to like straight lines. Traditionally speaking, can we agree with that?
Yes. In
general, and I don't care what species you talk about, probably let's just think about cattle. If we have a heifer out there in the show ring where her neck ties into the top side of her shoulder, basically the top of her shoulder, the apex, the wither, we'll call it. If we're talking about horses, right there, if we go from the top of their shoulder back, straight back to their tail head, if we come off that shoulder and it's a perfectly straight line off the shoulder through the top line to the hooks to the pins are set up there high, tail head, everything you could almost put a level on there and there's no deviation. That straight of a line, in my opinion, is not a positive. Why?
Well, probably because they're going to be too tight when they move.
Exactly. And not only probably, they're going to be. To make things that straight, they are too tight. If we give them just a little bit of ease in that spine, or people call it a little looser structured in the old days in the pig world, and I'm not advocating for loose structured show stock necessarily, but I think there's a fine line there where we like things straight and their skeleton tied together really well, and there's an attractive package versus that really loose skeleton, loose structure, if I can use that term, where when they relax, they kind of fall apart into pieces. But guess what? They're real flexible when they go into motion. They may still be a little ugly in motion, but they do flex and they get out and go better versus those ones that are perfectly straight. Where I like to see it, and it's a very fine line, let's have enough looseness of skeleton that when we get off them, like Ryan, what you talked about, just let them stand there on the chain or the halter and don't put pressure on that head. It's okay if they ease up just a little bit and we get a little bit of ease in that top, or just things loosen up just a touch. But when you ask them to go, I want all that to come back together to a certain degree and look good. And when you ask them to drive, I want it all to come back together. But to get that effortless movement that you and I like, I think we have to sacrifice just a little bit, and maybe not that perfectly straight top line, maybe not that perfectly level hip, but just enough looseness of skeleton and looseness of spine that they can move effortlessly. So move effortlessly, look good when you're stuck, standing there, just standing there, except just a little bit of not being perfect in their lines.
I think that there's merit to what you say, but I think there's also, I think that it's like, I don't know, the way you're describing it's a little much for me.
I understand. I guess I'm trying to find that fine line where they're loose enough skeleton without falling apart and being ugly, loose enough skeleton to move effortlessly, yet not too loose where they can still hold themselves together. And I know that's hard to envision. It's a very fine, there's not many livestock that do it really, really well, but I do see them. I was asked by a cattle producer, Ryan, do I prefer when the cattle are walking that they move their heads up and down a little bit, or if the head just stays perfectly level? I'm asking you the question now.
I don't even really pay attention to that, I guess.
And I did pay attention to it, but the question when asked, it hit me a little off guard. But if I put thought into it, there's no question I like that level head, because that means to me, when they're bobbing that head or their upper body's moving, it's because they're moving because it's a little bit of a struggle down low to take that step, or it takes a little more effort. So I think there's things to this, and I see this in maybe the old school cattle breeders and maybe other countries, even in South America. It's interesting. You hear different breeders talk about different things, and that's one of them that's been asked to me a couple different times, that if they get up and they put that head up fairly high and they're moving and that head is just staying consistent, not bobbing up and down, that it's less effort. The joints and everything are working better down low. So there's a lot of things that people use to evaluate what they believe are indications of structural soundness on their feet and legs, or movement ability, or I guess the broad term structural correctness. And everybody's going to look at it different. And I think right now in the judging arena, and Ryan wants them to at least break it down and describe where they're acceptable and where it's not. But I think in general, when somebody's talking about one's skeletal integrity, their opinion may be way different than somebody else's. And that comes all the way back to Ryan's very first comments. There's nothing wrong with that. So let's go a little deeper and describe, I'm okay with being a little straighter in their knee. Or I'm a judge that's okay if they're a little pop in that pastern, because I think they'll be fine as a cow later. Maybe instead of the broad terminology, we need to be more open-minded, that everybody has their opinions, and maybe as judges, maybe they need to explain what they're accepting and what they're going to be more critical on, so people can follow it just like they follow body shape or muscle or finish.
I think the big thing on all this is, for me, like I stated at the start, I don't care what your opinion is, because you're entitled to it, and that's fine. But I do think that if you have watched a judge for multiple hours, at some point the people in the audience need to be able to determine, this is the line of acceptability on what this person calls sound enough or not sound enough. And I think that in terms of describing the structural differences, you can use different words and all that other stuff, but I think that is where we become the least accurate as judges overall. And a lot of times I think we talk about, like I said earlier, you go 6 hours in and the person out in the ring is critical on straight-fronted animals, straight front animals. And then we get to hour 6:30, 6 hours and 30 minutes. And one that's just as straight or straighter wins. I think we use structure sometimes. People use structure as that deal that we don't have to talk about it, or we don't have to acknowledge it, because maybe that's when, maybe my buddy's is a little too straight, so I'm just not going to say anything and let that one win. I think that, or at least that's what I hear from more people than anybody else, is that's when the politics and the buddy system and all that, it comes into effect more there. And so
we used it as a negative earlier, and all of a sudden we've accepted it.
right. And so I think the big key factors are just call a spade a spade. Even if you want to use it, I know that this one's too straight, but the other things that this one does in terms of muscle and look and whatever you want to say, make up for it in this particular group. So that one's going to win because, like I said, people do listen. More people than you think listen. But that's where I'm at.
No, this was good, and Ryan and I both agree how attractive it is to us when they come in that effortless movement, and he appreciates it because of his background, and they were easier to get shown. And I think that still applies today. I appreciate, I guess, from today, from a breeder, even if it's just a show stock breeder perspective, it would be nice across species to have them raise their young better, maybe get more longevity where they're not going crippled on us or whatever, causing issues that fails in reproduction. But there's a lot of reasons to make animals better built and move more freely in flexible joints. And I know it's hard, especially when we're trying to pack a bunch of muscle on. We're trying to do so many things that just aren't natural. And I encourage you to do it. I'm all about those unique things and striving for that one that's opened up and muscular and flexible, all of those things. And it's good. We've got that goal out there, that ideal out there that we want to get to, but it sure is a challenge. In my opinion, I wish we would see the animals a little more emphasis when they're on the move, evaluating some of those things. And I think we are going that way a little bit, but I appreciate the discussion, Ryan. It's going to get a lot harder as we go into question and answer because I did take a little bit of time and I dug back into those emails.
Okay.
I found some. Are you ready?
Yep.
First one comes from Lewis, and a couple of these are longer. I am a farm-to-plate producer that supplies many of the high-end restaurants in our area. We supply meat from all 4 species as well as chicken, turkeys, and eggs. My children are not old enough to show, and I did not show livestock myself. However, I have been around the show ring and thought I understood it at some level. When we search for useful, and he's referring, I think, here just to pigs, even though he's talking about all species. When I search for useful Yorkshires, Durocs, and Berkshires, it has become a situation, and many of these breeds are only available from show stock-based operations. 10 to 15 years ago, our sows were winning 10-plus average. Now we're at 7 pigs weaned. We also see consistently slower weight gains each year, even with increased efforts in management and nutrition. This is frustrating when you're attempting to feed people, and the genetics on the purebred swine side are going in a direction that does not work. Why would the show ring not want to produce productive hog?
This man clearly has not been around the show ring.
Well, I'm okay with I'm okay. I mean, he has.
Of course you are, because you're a commercial weirdo.
Well, no,
you want the show ring to mimic the commercial industry, and it does not. And you're a hypocrite because your goats don't do anything commercial.
No, and if I ever pretended they would,
but you're a hypocrite.
Never.
I don't care what you say.
Never.
And I'm not being disrespectful to this person, but like, it's just not going to happen. It's just not.
I think their thoughts when they were younger that it did correlate, and depending on the age of them, it may have.
When I was younger, you know what? People smoked Marlboro Rebs and didn't vape, but guess what? It's a different world now. Strawberry shortcake vapes are in, so move on. But
and I agree with them. I don't think you can go find those breeds that aren't.
I'm not disagreeing with anything the man said, but it's just not gonna change, not anytime soon. And so I guess the question is why would the show ring not want that? Because with the show ring, go back and read the trend or listen to the trends episode.
I assume that's what stimulated the question. I do not.
The week before. It has nothing to do with commercial. It's what judges want in the show ring. And that has nothing to do with the commercial industry. Because here's the simple answer. 20, 30 years ago, there was a lot more people in commercial ag than there are now. uh, genetics and environment affects everything. There's not nearly as many people in commercial ag, especially those out there judging or in the show ring. This is a novelty, and that's just is what it is.
That was good. Predictable and good. Okay, the next one, Lewis, I feel for you, even if Ryan doesn't.
Then call
Jim.
Dale personally.
Jim, I love the podcast and what you guys do each week to make the junior stock show industry the best it can be. My question is, here, this goes right into what we talked about. Probably where I got some of my ideas. My question is, showmen have gotten so good at adjusting how they set up an animal with hair, with wool on lambs, goats, whatever, that can be fit well to make angles look correct. What basically he's asking, why don't judges move them more? Go more on the move. I think you already answered it earlier.
I think the reason that people don't move them more is because, just like I said, I think there is a stigma or there is a perception that when a judge walks them 4 or 5 times, that they don't know what they're doing or they're buying time trying to figure it out or all this other stuff. And I don't think that's necessarily the case, but that's there. And like I said during the podcast, and what perception is reality. And so I think that is the reason why. Maybe now everybody will start letting their sheep go, since Dale said that was the thing. Maybe
it was at one time, and now it no longer is. So maybe not, but it is pretty amazing how much easier you're more likely to find the best animal if you do that. I've seen, maybe over at the sheep show and sale with at Willoughby's in Indianapolis or Indiana, when it used to be, I don't remember even where it was, but maybe they still do. Some of those they actually cut loose the prospects. I don't know if it's because of I'm not sure why they do it. I don't know if it's because they want the judge to better evaluate. I have no idea, but I do remember in recent history they were doing that. So I'm sure some of our listeners can update us on that, because I have not been there to watch that as of recent. Okay, the next one's long, Ryan. It's going to go a little more commercial than what you're going to like. And last week, there's a lot of questions coming from that. And I got a lot of text over that, good and bad, both sides of the issue. I don't know that it was hate mail, but disagreement mail, maybe. On the last podcast concerning trends, Ryan said that the black heifers he and Shelley Overpeck showed, I believe it was Shelley, correct, that you talked about at the Scimitals?
Yes.
Just want to make sure to get that right. At the Scimital Junior Nationals, that one were driving forces for the breed to make the cattle black. And I think we went into that and discussed it fairly deep. Given the time and what was happening, and I couldn't even tell you what year it is, but Ryan could. Given the time and what was happening in the commercial industry, where colored cattle, non-black, were being discounted $4 to $15 per hundredweight, the Scimitals and other breeds worked to provide cattle that were not discounted at the auction market and created value for the bulls for the commercial industry. Along with sale barn value, the percentage of choice cattle was lower. So in other words, they're I'll just read it. Choice cattle was much lower at the time. Black-hided cattle had a higher propensity of grading choice, and that drove the auction market pricing differential. Is a commercial marketplace and the correlation of black-hided cattle grading better at that time on the rail more of a correlation to why the driving force for European breeds to make cattle black rather than a junior national placing or champion and reserve, basically?
I think in general, probably, and he's commercially driving this. I did not say that because Shelley Overpeck and I won a Scimital Junior Nationals that all the Scimitals went black. That's not what I'm saying. But that whole era.
But essentially from there on, they
did, but I'm not. I just don't want people to think that I'm got such a big ego that I think that's the reason why. No, but it was in every breed that was the time when they were starting to make them black, and the black ones were winning, and so that's why now you see a red lemmy and it's like an anomaly. It's like, oh look, they still exist, or red and white mane, etc. I agree with this person that black-hided cattle always have had a premium, all this other stuff. And maybe back then there was and there was more of a correlation to commercial industry back then, because like Dale brought up, I don't know if it was last week or whatever, a lot of the steer weights used to be you couldn't be over this much because that is what would get discounted if their carcass weight was over so much in the packing houses and all that. So yeah, there's some validity to what he says. I also am going to say that at the same time, while they could have transformed that in the commercial industry to get the black-hided premiums and all the things that he's saying, if they wanted a one in the show ring, we'd still be showing red and white Simmentals if that is what continued to win, regardless of what happened in the commercial deal.
I think it's interesting, and I know Mr. Boggs knew him fairly well at one time when I was coaching at the university level and just through coaching. And I could be wrong. I hope I'm not misspeaking, but I think he was aware and valued the commercial side of it. So I think maybe his willingness to use the black ones, maybe it was because, and I don't know the year or anything, but maybe it was because there was already a push on the commercial side to make them black, or he saw that coming, or whatever it may be. There could be a lot of reasons for it, but I think at that time, I think it was intertwined. I mean, I think it affected each other, and I'm going to concede at this time that it just isn't, it doesn't exist anymore. How's that, Ryan? Does that make you feel better?
No, but I'm also saying I agree with that man's statement, and I agree with what you're saying. At one time, it was very commercially, I mean, not all driven, but there was a lot of characteristics that had to be the same in both. But I am going to state, and I completely believe this, when we, in that era, if the black ones had it and won, we'd still be showing red curly-haired limmies. We'd still be showing red and white Simmentals and red and white manes. Because in this industry, you're going to go for and you're going to buy and you're going to select what wins. Because at some point, this deal has always been a little bit of a novelty. Now, way more than ever. But, I mean, it was probably back in the Chicago days when the steer that wins the Chicago International could have come from a commercial breeder as well as somebody else. I mean, you even have to admit, Dale, there's been a little novelty to this for a long time.
I'm going to say it every single year since the Chicago days, it becomes more novel. Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't even know then, I'm not saying it couldn't have come from a commercial producer with a little bit of management.
But that kind of, when that deal went out, that opened up the door even more, in my opinion. That's a significant historical event. I
agree. And you, I'm not aging you, but do you remember when there was a time when you had to just show blue butt market hogs, barrows. That was what was winning, period. And because of it, just to reinforce your point, that was what was winning. Consequently, that's what producers were producing. Maybe that's what producers were producing, and that was what was available to win. You can say the chicken before the egg or vice versa and argue that all day. But it went from blue butts, I believe, to belted hogs. And if you had Mr. Fugate, yes, Mr. Fugate wanted to show some of these red spotted hogs, calicos, all those before.
I love me a Halloween colored hog. I love them.
But back in the day, those probably didn't get a look. And all of a sudden, when a few good ones show up and a few judges use them and they say, well, we can use them, I don't think they're discriminated against at this point, the calicos, do you? Hell, no. I almost go the other way. They get my attention. I'm going to look at them. I'm not saying that they're going to win, but they will get my attention. If they're really good, I'm damn sure not going to miss them. But if they're really bad, you're probably drawing more attention to a bad one. Right. But no, this is good. I appreciate it. This a little less arguing than usual.
No, I'm definitely less than last week.
Okay, well, I think that is all. I appreciate it, Ryan. Until next week, be safe.
Y'all come back now, you hear?